Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CCB Cyber Tips webinar. My name is Clara Grillet, and I am a CTI Analyst at the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium. Today feels a little special because it is the last Cyber Tips of the year. We decided not to do any in December because we all know that December is all about rushing to finish everything up before the Christmas holidays. So I will see you back in January. Hopefully, everybody will be well rested for another year of webinars. To conclude this year, we decided to focus this webinar on the topic of email security. I did a little experiment and I saw that I received, on average, about 76 emails per day. And that, of course, does not include all the emails that got filtered out and never reached my inbox. So needless to say, email is the backbone of business communication. And for a threat actor, it is a treasure trove of information, because emails is where you're going to be talking about confidential information, sharing internal projects. That's a good way to learn about how you communicate with your customers and your suppliers, but also what your internal procedures and processes are. So it's all the kind of information that a threat actor would love to have in order to further compromise your organization. So to help us navigate all of this, I have the pleasure of welcoming Kristof Tuyteleers, who is a CISO at DNS Belgium and an expert in securing digital infrastructure. Welcome, Kristof.
Hi, Clara, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me, and certainly looking forward to the discussion we will have.
Thanks, Kristof, for making a little bit of time for us today. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. As I mentioned, today's topic is email security. Email is pretty much almost year on year the #1 entry point for cyber attacks. And so just a minute ago, I mentioned that emails contain a lot of valuable information for attackers. Kristof, is that the only reason why email is such an attractive target for cyber criminals?
I think there are a few reasons. First of all, email is universal, so every business uses email. But on the other side, it was never designed to be a secure, tamper-proof protocol. Email was built for openness, not for security. And when SMTP, the core email protocol, was created in the early 80s, the internet was still a trusted, a safe space. Security was not the design goal. Reliability and simplicity were. So as a result, there is, by default, no built-in authentication. There is no encryption, no integrity protection built-in email. So security was added afterwards. Features that we'll cover today, like SPF and DKIM and DMARC, are add-ons, not native components. They improve security, but they remain optional features. And that means by default, email is easily spoofed or manipulated. We see that all the time because people forge the from address. No guarantee that the sender is really who he or she claims to be. It's still easy to intercept or alter messages in transit. There is no guarantee that a message hasn't been tampered with. And of course, we also see that from time to time, email accounts get hijacked. So at the other side, or the third side, mail, of course, is also a direct line to people. Email relies on human decision making, and attackers know that, and they want to trick us to click on things. They exploit the human trust, and techniques like phishing and spoofing and business email compromise keep working. That's the reason. And at the other side also there, the human eye is easily fooled. Lookalike domains are still a very popular way to get people to click on phishing mails, for example. And businesses, and a lot of businesses, still use mail to distribute sensitive information, to share invoices, to send contracts to each other, financial instructions, and sometimes still today even credentials. And that makes it a lucrative environment for espionage and fraud. And lastly, email is easy and cheap, but it also means that it's easy and cheap to attack. Sending millions and millions of malicious mails almost costs nothing. And even a tiny success rate leads to profit for those hackers, those attackers.
So it's very interesting that you say it is very easy and cheap to attack. Do you think then that organizations tend to underestimate the scale of the risks? Maybe it might be a little bit better phrase if I say, Would you say that we have a false sense of security because we think that email security is just about recognizing phishing?
Indeed, I think so, because the potential impacts are, of course, huge. Hey? You have the financial loss, the data leakage, reputational damage, and so on. Um, because, but we now see a focus that tends to be on phishing and user awareness. But email security goes far beyond that inbox. Although it's worth repeating, of course, that multi-factor authentication is a requirement for every mailbox and every service that allows password resets via email. So that's, I think, a non-negotiable. But on a corporate level, the domain name itself, so the domain name that's being used as to send mails, can be manipulated through things like DNS spoofing and cache poisoning, and this can really harm an organization. If attackers tamper with DNS, they can redirect your customer, they can steal login credentials, they can impersonate your entire organization, and we've seen that from time to time. So, and then finally, don't forget the risk that comes with abandoned domain names. If you release a domain name, if you no longer use it, that also poses a risk. And for example, last year, ethical hacker Inti de Keukelaar, who many of you know, bought more than 100 domain names previously belonging to social welfare and police and justice institutions in Belgium. He was able to intercept dozens and dozens of emails still being sent to mail addresses linked to those domains. And he was even able to access cloud accounts attached to email addresses that once belonged to those expired domain names. So you see there is a huge potential for hackers to break in.
All right, that's a pretty worrying statement. So your takeaway, if I understand it, is that when you're talking about a critical attack surface, you're talking about the email, but also the domain behind it. And that maybe we currently, as defenders, we address these issues, but maybe only partially. If that is so, and you're going to see where I'm going with this, what can you do to protect yourself?
Okay. So the good news is I think that we have strong, mature standards. For email, it's a trio: SPF, DKIM, DMARC. I mentioned them before. So we refer to them as a trio, as a team, because they complement one another. Each addresses a different aspect of email security. SPF and DKIM stop attackers from pretending to be you. And with DMARC, sorry, you can decide what to do when spoofing is detected. And I've created a few slides to make that more clear. So what you see here on the screen is a very simple representation of an email. It has an envelope, a header, and a body. And the envelope is the technical wrapper used during mail delivery. It contains routing information, for example, the mail from and the recipient to. And it's very important to keep in mind that this envelope is not visible to the end user. It's being used for machine-to-machine communication. And then below you have the message, the headers, and the body. That's what the recipient actually sees or is able to see. So depending on the mail client, it shows more or less information on the header part. So, and that message header, for example, contains the from field. So the from field, what you see as a human being, doesn't have to be the same as the mail from in the envelope. And I think that's one of the big security problems, of course, with mail. And then you have the message body that actually contains the data, the text, the attachments, etc. So you can think of an email like a physical letter inside an envelope. The envelope is for the mail system and the postman, and the message, the headers and the bodies is for human reader, where the headers are more or less the same as a letterhead for a physical letter. And then on this slide, on screen now, you see how SPF protects the host, the sending email system, and DKIM protects the sender domain, the from address, the sending email address, but also the integrity of the message content. For the domain integrity itself, we use DNSSEC. And you have to think of DNSSEC as a way to protect the foundation of your domain name by ensuring that the DNS configuration, also including the email specific records that I just mentioned, can't be tampered with. So they all play a specific role, and together they form a robust defense system. Another added benefit, I guess, of all these standards is that they are free to implement. So it will only cost you some time to configure and, of course, some knowledge. And although these things are free, I've put the current state of affairs for the .be zone because that's the one we are managing on the screen. I don't have any up-to-date numbers for the adoption of DKIM, so I've left them out. But as you can see, SPF is configured for just over half of the domains in the .be. For DMARC, this is approximately 1 out of 10. These figures only indicate the existence of the records, not the correctness of the configuration. So that's a disclaimer. And you also see here that about 1/3 of all domains have DNSSEC configured, so they are tamper-proof.
So we have tools that are available that are free that you can just implement, but the adoption is still a little bit slow or not entirely complete. I have a question for you that's actually been gnawing at me a little bit. Is it true that if you misconfigure one of the standards, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, then it's like you have no protection at all? That has to be the three of them work together or it's useless.
I wouldn't put it like that. It's honestly, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's not an all or nothing kind of situation. So the three protocols are normally used together, but they don't have to be. So you can use DKIM and SPF on its own, or DKIM and SPF together with DMARC. So there are a couple of possible combinations. But a misconfiguration in, for example, the DKIM setup often might break your DMARC configuration. So there is clearly a link between those.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. It's a couple of things that I've heard sometimes, and I was just wondering, let me ask an expert. So you mentioned that SPF, DKIM, DMARC are a trio of standards that are working together. Could you maybe quickly explain what each of them actually does? Like, how are they different and how do they work together?
Sure. So SPF, the Standard Policy Framework, lets you publish which servers are allowed to send email on your behalf. And you see this on the screen. It's a simple representation of an SPF record in DNS. You put in the name servers, the IP addresses of the name servers, the IP addresses of the mail servers that are allowed to send. And when your email is received, the receiving server checks, is this email coming from a server the domain owner has authorized? And if not, it's suspicious. But of course, SPF alone isn't enough, and that's where DKIM comes in. DKIM, domain keys identified mail, uses cryptographic signatures to verify that an email really comes from the domain it claims to. The sending mail server signs each message with a private key, and the receiving server checks the signature using the corresponding public key. And that public key is published in DNS. That's that long blob you see on the screen. And this confirms two things. First of all, the message was not altered in transit, so its integrity is still okay, and it was legitimately sent by a server authorized for that domain, so it's authentic. So the two main aspects here are the DKIM record stored in DNS with the digital signature with the public key needed to do the digital signature verification, and the DKIM header, which is attached to all mails from the sender domain. And then thirdly, we have DMARC, domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. It builds on SPF and DKIM by adding a policy layer. So it tells the receiving mail server what to do when a message fails authentication. So should it be allowed? So do nothing. Should it be quarantined or rejected? And on top of that, DMARC also provides reporting. That's what you see at the right side. So you can configure a couple of mail addresses where you send those reports about the failures, for example, to. So this helps you to get insights into shadow IT, misconfiguration, and misuse. In this case, I think, or in all cases, the best practice is to implement DMARC gradually, meaning moving from allow, do nothing, to quarantine, to reject, to clean up your entire email ecosystem.
All right. So if I understand it correctly, in a way, DMARC is at the same time the policy layer and also the monitoring layer, right?
Yeah, honestly, I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you. That's very flattering. Um, Earlier in our discussion, you also talked about DNSSEC, and that sort of I found it interesting because to me, DNSSEC, it exists to protect the DNS records, but not directly the emails. So why would you say that DNSSEC fits into email security?
Okay. It's quite simple, I guess, because every online request starts with a DNS query. So this includes, of course, browsing to a website, but it also includes sending emails because the sending server has to know where to send that message to. So DNS, simply said, is a distributed database. And in our case, that database contains records that describe how to secure your email infrastructure. The examples I just put on the screen. But DNS is a plain text protocol. So it's from that very old, secure time when we all trusted each other. And without DNSSEC, attackers can perform cache poisoning or spoof DNS responses. And that means they could redirect traffic, so also mail traffic. They could replace your mail servers. They could intercept the mail messages. And DNSSEC adds digital signatures. So again, digital signatures, sorry, as with DKIM, but at the DNS level. And it does that to ensure that the information users and systems receive really comes from legitimate DNS servers, from the authoritative server. We call DNSSEC a chain of trust because each level, you see that on the right side of the drawing, each level in the DNS hierarchy is verified by the level above it. So we have a DNS key record that contains the public key for a zone. We create a hash of that key and we put that record containing the hash, that's the DS record, in the level above it. And this lets every layer confirm that the underlying one is genuine from the root all the way down to the domain you're querying. Of course, as with everything, there's also a downside. You can sign, but the signatures also have to be validated on the DS resolvers. So signing alone is not enough. DNSSEC also has to be validated on the DNS servers.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, DNSSEC is part of email security because it is the foundation protocol because of the prevalence of DNS in the way that the entirety of the internet works.
Yeah, absolutely. So without DNSSEC, you're relying on what I would like to call insecure plumbing.
This series is called Cyber Tips. So do you have practical tips to share with us today?
Yeah, I have a lot of them. So I've put my top 10 on a slide. Most of them we already touched upon. So first of all, enable DNSSEC. That's the basis. If it's too complex or you don't know how to start, you can always ask your registrar to do that for you. Deploy SPF, DKIM, and DMARC and aim for DMARC reject. Also review those DMARC reports. Those DMARC reports are a kind of continuous security monitoring that you get almost for free. It's very important to inventory all services that send mail for your organization. So not only your corporate mail server, but also marketing tools, the CRM, the ticketing system. Everything must be authorized to send mail in your behalf. And I always advise people to use separate domains for transactional mail and for marketing mail. So if marketing mails reduce your reputation, but because people flag it as spam or junk, then it doesn't interfere with the reputation of your corporate domain. Of course, the domain lifecycle management itself, from registration to deletion, is very important. And I was very pleased to read in the new Cyber Fundamentals standard, the Siphon 2025, that there is a recommendation to keep a domain name 10 years, so 10 years, I will stress on that one, after putting it out of use. And I will come back to that, how you can configure such a domain name. Um, Monitor DNS integrity, monitor for record changes, wanted and unwanted, and if they work as assumed. Monitor the domain reputation itself. Attackers abusing your domain can really hurt the deliverability of email. And there are multiple non-commercial and commercial services out there that can help you with it. Monitor for lookalike domains and typo squatting. You can do that via certificate transparency logs. And a very interesting one, of course, is reduce your attack surface, disable unused email domains and subdomains. And I've specifically for this one, I've created a separate slide with some tips, with some advice. So even if you don't use a domain anymore to send and to receive mail, you should configure it in DNS and you should configure these records. So there is what we call a null MX record that states, hey, we don't accept any mail anymore for this domain over here. You do the same with SPF, just to make all the servers on the internet aware that nobody, no server at all is authorized to send mail in behalf of our domain. And thirdly, you configure DMARC to send you reports. Of course, you configure an email address on a separate domain, because otherwise you won't receive those reports, of course. So now let's return to the other practical tips. We're almost finished. Like I mentioned before, not really hardcore techie mail server technology, but enforce MFA for all email accounts to prevent account takeover, and train your employees to detect phishing, but also make them aware that email by default is not a secure protocol. So please don't send very sensitive or confidential data via mail. There are much more secure platforms, other means to do that for you.
Great, thank you, Kristof. That is quite a checklist, and also a very clear explanation about why we should be adopting some of those practical tips and which ones might be a little bit easier to implement. For those of you who would like to read more about SPF, DKIM, DMARC, and DNSSEC, but also how to implement this in your organization, we have a bunch of useful resources you might want to look at. Some of them come from the CCB, others are more technical guidance, step by step, and other resources also to check the implementation that you already have, see what others might be able to flag. So I would encourage you to just take a look at those resources that might come in really handy, and all of them are also free. We're now coming towards the end of today's webinar, and so to let Kristof, catch his breath for a minute and take a look at the questions. Once again, the most upvoted ones will be answered. So if you haven't dropped your question yet, please do so. And if there are some questions you really want to get answered today, please vote for them. In the meantime, I have a couple of announcements to make. This may be the last webinar of the year, but no worries, we have plenty in store for next year. We will first kick the year off with our traditional QCTR that will take place on the 29th of January. As always, we will take a look at the Belgian cyber threat landscape for the past quarter, and also take a look at the outlook for 2026. We also have already another Cyber Tips webinar in store for you, and that one will take place on the 19th of February. There we will dive deeper into the world of MISP and how onboarding on MISP can be really helpful for your organization. A new year also means a new focus. If there are topics that you would like us to address, please make sure to fill the survey at the end of today's session. Every single one of your responses are read, and we actually use the responses that you give us to help pick topics for future webinars. We have about, I want to say 5 to 8 minutes to answer some of your questions. So Kristof, the floor is yours. Please feel free to pick your first question.
Okay, I saw some very interesting stuff over there. I'm not going to start with the most upvoted one, because that's maybe a little bit more complex. So I need another one to get me started. There are a couple of questions that are all related to the fact that people if they want to set it up, if they want to set it up properly, they are struggling with the fact that the receiving end, for example, doesn't validate correctly or doesn't use the policy information, etc., etc. So people that know me a little bit better, they also know that I'm a big fan of the comply or explain approach in the Netherlands. That means that organizations that want to participate in tenders have to comply with security standards, including mail standards. And I think that would be a very nice approach also to implement, to do in Belgium, so that most of the companies get aware of these security standards, that they are almost forced to implement them if they want to be part of that tendering process, to get us all on a higher level. Because I've also looked up the data for .fr, they're publicly available, and I must say we're really lagging behind when it comes to SPF, DKIM, and DMARC adoption in Belgium. So I think it's a correct observation to see that even although you want to configure it properly for your organization, that you're struggling with the fact that others don't. So that's what I also mentioned in the beginning, that the ecosystem is fragmented and uneven, that not all the mail servers implement modern protections. And this leaves also the, let's say, the companies that are really focusing on security, that tend to leave them vulnerable. That's one thing. I also got a question like, why don't you do the checks and it all has to be okay before you put it in the zone or before you make it available, meaning the domain available for the people? Honestly, I don't think we can do that. That's not our role, but our role is to create awareness. That's also why I'm here and why I work together with the CCB to create these very nice guidelines that you can read after this webinar. There was a very specific question about what signals to use to detect compromised email accounts that still pass. That's a very tricky one. If I understand it correctly, compromised email accounts are really breached accounts where somebody has found the credentials or stolen the credentials to log in and then sent mail on behalf of you, pretending to be the person. So via directly from your mailbox, which is of course very hard to do. I think for that scenario, maybe you should look into another way of setting it up, that you can only send corporate mail via from your computer via VPN from your own corporate network, things like that. But I know that people like to use their mail on their mobile phones, etc., in their private time. So that's always a balance you need to find. Um, but it's tricky because then you have to look at maybe a combination between IP addresses, moment in time, things like that. Um, I think that's challenging. So that I don't have a correct, complete answer to that neither, I must say. You have to forgive me about it. There was also a question about the statistics, a jump early 2019 in the statistics. I'm just going to take the graph with me. Often the jump is not caused by the companies themselves, but for example, the registrars that implement additional security for all their customers. So that's why you sometimes see a huge leap in the statistics. And I think that's also something, and I already mentioned it, an advice: if you don't have the capacity yourself, if you don't have the knowledge yourself, there is always someone in the pod between you as the registrant and we as the registry and as a registrar. Often they provide hosting and mail services, etc. So they're also the experts in this domain, and they can help you, and I'm pretty sure that they love to help you with that.
It's really good to know that you're not entirely alone,
Mm.
and that sometimes you can, request help from somebody else. I see that it is already 10:31, so technically, if we have time for a tiny little question, if you could take another one up, Kristof.
Let's see. Okay, yeah, there's an obvious one. How can you easily check if the DKIM SPF DMARC settings have been implemented for a domain and that they have been implemented correctly? And I must say, a couple of people already commented on that, and they've pointed to some very nice tools online that you can use. They're also on the slides that you just showed, Clara. I really invite everyone to check the links, like with Internet NL, etc. It's very easy to put in your domain name, you get a scoring, you get a rating, also with some recommendations, what to fix, what to improve. So that's will really be helpful for anyone. So you can do it right away. Maybe it turns out to be all red and not good for the moment, but then you have something to do the rest of the week, I would say.
Thank you, Kristof, for giving us a little bit of work. So we are really coming towards the end of the webinar today. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and for asking so many great questions. And also, of course, a huge thank you to Kristof for insights today. And a big thank you to everybody for watching and for just being present once again. So as always, we'll send you an email when the recording and all the resources will be made available. It will be on YouTube, and otherwise you will find these slides as well on the CCB's website. For everyone here, have a happy end of year, and we will see you again next year on the 29th of January for the QCTR. Have a very good day, everyone. Bye.